A man wins the highest award his industry can give him. He holds it in his hands, and what he feels, standing there, is that it belongs to somebody else, that they have made a mistake, that if these people knew who he actually was, they would take it back. So he goes and finds a drink, to quiet the voice. That man was Russ Taff. He would go on to win 6 of those awards, and decades later, he sat down in front of a camera and told us, in his own words, exactly what was going through his mind on the night the first one arrived. Stay with us, because the reason you have almost certainly never heard him say it has nothing to do with him hiding it, and everything to do with one single evening in October when this story was told in full and then disappeared. Here is what happened to it. Russ told the whole thing in a documentary called I Still Believe. It was made by director Rick Altizer, and it did not go to a streaming service. It went to movie theaters for exactly one night, October the 30th, 2018, 7 in the evening, local time, everywhere in the country at once, more than 700 screens. Sellouts in Dallas, in Minneapolis, in Nashville, in Tulsa. That night it was the #2 per screen average movie in America, ahead of nearly everything Hollywood had in wide release. And the next morning it was gone. No second weekend, no long run. If you did not buy a ticket for that one Tuesday, you missed it. So let us put the man back in front of you, because even devoted fans tend to miss the size of what he did. Russ Taff fronted the Imperials in the late 70s and left them in 1981, and in those years he sang Praise the Lord, a performance that still gets called out as one of the finest in the history of the genre. And the way he got that job tells you something about the voice. His own band had been booked to open for the Imperials. 2 years later, the Imperials came back and asked him to be their lead vocalist. You do not get that phone call because you are competent. You get it because somebody heard something they could not stop thinking about. He went solo in 1983. We Will Stand came out of that first solo record, a song thousands of congregations have sung without ever knowing whose voice put it there. Then, Medals in 1985. Then the self-titled album in 1987. Then, Under Their Influence in 1991. Along the way, farther on, Not Gonna Bow, I Cry. 6 Grammy Awards. Billboard called him the single most electrifying voice in Christian music. And here is the part most fans do not know. Russ Taff has been inducted into the Gospel Music Association Hall of Fame 3 separate times, as a solo artist, as a member of the Imperials, and as a member of the Gaither Vocal Band. 3 inductions. Nobody else has done that. Now hold all of that in your mind and go back with me to a town called Farmersville, California. Because everything that made that voice, and everything that nearly destroyed the man behind it, started in the same house. He was born in November of 1953 to Joe and Ann Taff, the 4th of 5 sons. His father worked as a machinist, and he pastored a small Pentecostal church called East Side Tabernacle, a congregation of about 20 people. His mother was a singer, a real one who had sung with her sisters. She told Russ he sang his first solo at 4 years old, and she was the one who lifted him up and stood him on that altar so the congregation could see him. Their home was strict. The one form of entertainment allowed in it was his mother's gospel record collection. So after school, a small boy would lie down on the floor between 2 old stereo speakers and let Mahalia Jackson and the 5 Blind Boys of Alabama fill his head. That is where the voice came from. Not a conservatory, a living room floor in the San Joaquin Valley, and 4 brothers to sing quartet with. That is the picture. Hold on to it, because there is another one, running at the same time, in the same rooms. Russ has said it in his own words, and he says it the way a man says a thing he has said many times, and it still costs him. I was 7 years old when I found my father drunk. 7. He had never seen a person drunk before in his life, and the first one he ever saw was the man who stood up on Sunday and preached to those 20 people. Now the father is the part of this story that has been told. There is a second part that has not been, and the film does not soften it. When the people who made that documentary wrote the description of their own film, they did not write that Russ suffered at the hands of an alcoholic father. They wrote that he suffered at the hands of an alcoholic father and an abusive mother, both parents. That is not a rumor somebody attached to this story from outside. That is how the story was described by the people Russ trusted to tell it, with his cooperation, on a film that carries his own name. Sit with what that means. The same woman who lifted him onto that altar so he could sing. The same records on that floor. Both things are true, in the same house, about the same person. That is not a contradiction a 7-year-old gets to work out. That is just what his childhood was. But the thing that broke something in him was not what happened inside the house. It was what happened outside it was. Because a small church notices, and eventually a small church acts. Russ has said he was 13 years old when the family was asked to leave that church. Not the father alone, the family. And in his own account of it, the part that lands hardest is not the leaving. It is this. Those were the only people he knew, and they walked away. Think about the arithmetic of that for a preacher's kid in a town that size. Church was the friendships, the Sunday dinner, the family calendar, the entire social world of a 13-year-old boy. It closed all at once, over something he had no hand in, and no power to stop. By 19, he was on the road traveling with an evangelist. By his mid-20s, he was fronting the Imperials. By his early 30s, he was one of the most decorated artists in Christian music, and none of it touched the thing underneath. This is the part the title of this video is pointing at, and it is not what most people assume. The natural guess is that the drinking came from the stress of the road, or from a bad season, or from some private crisis in middle age. That is not what he has said. What he has said is harder, and it explains everything that followed. When Russ Taff received his first Grammy, he did not feel vindicated. He felt like he did not deserve it, and he began to drink to silence the voices telling him so. The award did not heal the shame. The award fed it, because a boy who was pushed out of his own church at 13 learns a lesson about himself that no trophy can argue with. And the higher the industry lifted him, the louder the gap got between the man they were applauding and the man he believed he actually was. Every honor made the distance bigger. 6 Grammy Awards, 16 Dove Awards, 3 Hall of Fame inductions, and a private voice running underneath all of it, insisting that the whole thing was a case of mistaken identity. That is the secret. Not that he fell apart when things went badly, that he came apart while things were going well. And what finally cracked it open came from the one person who had watched all of it from 6 inches away. Russ has been married to Tori since 1976, 50 years this year. She is also his co-writer. A great many of the lyrics people love in his catalog came out of the two of them working together, which means she was putting words to his spiritual life at the same time she was living beside the private version of it. He has described the pattern honestly. He would pick a fight with her so that he had a reason to leave. And then one day she stopped him and said it out loud. In his telling of it, she told him, "Russ, I think you have a problem, and I think you're an alcoholic." He has said it broke his heart to hear it. He has also said he does not know if he could have heard it from anybody else. That is the whole hinge of this story, and it is worth being clear about what it cost her. Tori Taff was not a bystander in a redemption story. She was the person who decided to say the true sentence to a man who had built a career on not hearing it. There was no guarantee it would work. There were years of it before it did, and there was one other person. Russ has said that a friend saw what was going on, not the industry, not a manager, a friend, and that he finally sat down and confided in that man everything he had been doing. Think about how long it took to get to that sentence. Decades of standing in front of congregations, and the first place the truth actually landed was a wife and a friend. Not a stage, not a platform. 2 people, in private, who would not let it go. That is who got him out. Hold on to that, because in a moment you are going to see the same thing happen again. In public, to somebody else, in the Gaither family. Now here is where all of this collides with the footage most of you actually know him from. Bill Gaither invited Russ onto a homecoming video in 1991. He became a regular, and in the early 2000s, Bill asked him to do something more than guest. He asked him to join the Gaither Vocal Band as its baritone, taking the chair Mark Lowry had held for well over a decade. Look at what that meant. Russ Taff was a frontman. He had fronted the Imperials. He had headlined under his own name for 20 years. And he stepped into the one seat in a quartet where the whole job is to hold up the men on either side of you. He said at the time that he felt like he had come full circle. He stayed almost 3 years, alongside Bill, Guy Penrod, and David Phelps. The 2 albums the group made in that stretch pulled back-to-back Grammy nominations. He even co-wrote a song with Bill Gaither for the a cappella record. Then, early in 2004, after Vestal Goodman and Jake Hess both died within weeks of each other, Russ stepped down from the vocal band and went back to being a solo artist. And here is the hard thing to sit with. Russ now counts his sobriety in decades. He has spoken publicly of being roughly 20 years sober. Do that arithmetic backward from today, and the year he got free lands after he had already left that vocal band chair. Which means the seasons a great many of you remember most fondly. The homecoming tapings, the harmony on those records, that man standing between 2 of the biggest voices in the genre with his eyes closed, were seasons he was still fighting. The worship was real. The fight was real. Both were happening in the same man, on the same night, and not one person in that audience could see it. You have watched that footage. You have played it in your living room. He was carrying it the whole time. There is one more part of this that almost nobody connects, and it is about the man who asked him to take that chair. Bill Gaither had already made this decision once before, publicly, and at real cost. Go back to April the 28th, 1994. The Grand Ole Opry House in Nashville. Amy Grant is hosting the Dove Awards. Michael English, the former Gaither Vocal Band lead singer, the voice that had helped define the group's biggest era, walks away that night with 4 doves, including Artist of the Year and Male Vocalist of the Year. 8 days later, on May the 6th, it was over. English acknowledged an affair with a fellow gospel singer. Warner Alliance dropped him. Christian radio pulled his songs off the air. Bookstores took his records off the shelf. He had already resigned from the vocal band. And then, he did something almost unheard of. He boxed up the 4 Dove Awards and sent them back to the Gospel Music Association. For the record, the GMA still recognizes him as the winner of every one of them. The industry that had crowned him in April did not want his name spoken by June. Bill Gaither did not go along with it. And in early 2009, Bill announced that Michael English was rejoining the Gaither Vocal Band. And there is a moment just before that, which almost nobody links to any of this. Bill gathered up every living vocal band member he could find, past and present, more than 20 of them, and put them in one room for a reunion taping. Michael English was there, so was Russ Taff. English stood up in that room and sang, "I bowed on my knees," and the account of that night is that he brought the whole assembled company to its feet. Sitting somewhere in that same room, singing on that same recording, was a man whose own story had not yet been told to anybody outside his house. Now put the 2 men side by side. English, who fell in public and was erased for it. Russ, whose fight was private and who was still carrying it. Both invited back onto the same stage by the same man. That is not a coincidence of casting. Bill Gaither has spent 40 years running a platform where people who were not finished being repaired were allowed to keep singing. Russ Taff is not an exception to that pattern. He may be the clearest example of it. Which brings us to the Franklin Theater, on the night of October the 30th, 2018. The Taffs asked for that particular screening themselves, and they filled the room with their own people, the friends, the family, the artists they had known for 30 and 40 years. Bill Gaither, Mark Lowry, Amy Grant, Michael W. Smith, Bart Millard, Michael Tate, Chonda Pierce, and Stephen Curtis Chapman all appear in the film itself. Afterward, Amy Grant and Stephen Curtis Chapman played an acoustic set right there in the theater, and Russ has described what that was like. Sitting in a dark room, surrounded by the people he loves most in this world, watching his own worst moments and deepest regrets play across a screen in front of them. He said the thing he was completely unprepared for was the response, the compassion and acceptance that came back at him for telling the truth. Now here is why the timing of what came next matters, and almost nobody catches it. 3 days after that theater night, Russ released a record called Believe, his first new recording in more than 7 years. And on it was a brand new version of I Still Believe. He had been singing that song since 1987, 31 years. He sang it at the Grammys, he sang it on homecoming stages, he sang it in churches all over this country. And every single time, there were people in the room who did not know what it had cost him to mean it. He waited until they knew. Then he went back into a studio and cut it again. That is not a marketing decision. That is a man deciding that from now on, when he sings that title, everybody hearing it will know exactly what he is talking about. And he put the whole thing into one sentence when the film came out. His words. He said he is living proof that Jesus is still about his Father's business, one broken person at a time. Read that carefully, because it is not the sentence a man says to defend himself. He does not call himself a survivor. He does not call himself restored. He calls himself the broken person. Present tense. He puts himself in the same category as whoever is watching. That is the whole difference between a testimony and a press release. If you have followed him since the Imperials, you already know what we mean when we say that some of the most powerful voices in gospel music came out of the hardest houses in America. You have suspected it for years. You may have suspected it about somebody in your own family. What Russ did was say it on the record, with a camera running, when he no longer had a career to protect by staying quiet. And he did not stop there. In 2025, he put out an album called Cover Story. Songs that shaped his life, walked through one at a time, and by his own account, the most personal thing he has ever released. He is 72 years old. He is still on the road. And there is one question this leaves open that nobody has answered, and that only the people watching this can really weigh. Russ has said that trauma therapy is what led him to forgiving his parents. Both of them. The father he found drunk when he was 7, and the mother the filmmakers named alongside him. But that mother is also the woman who lifted a 4-year-old boy onto a church altar and told him to sing. She is the reason there were records in that house at all. She is, in the most literal sense, the reason we have ever heard his voice. So what does forgiveness actually cost, when the person you are forgiving is also the person who gave you the only gift you had? Some of you know the answer to that from your own family. That is a heavier thing than any of the awards on his shelf. Whatever comes next, those who have followed this ministry since the Imperials know one thing. Russ Taff's story is not finished. The man has been singing about a God who does not quit on people for nearly 50 years, and at 72 he is still the living argument for it. If this moved you, the next one will as well. We have been going through what actually happened to Michael English in 1994, the 8 days between the Dove Awards and the phone call, what he sent back to the Gospel Music Association, and what it cost Bill Gaither to say yes to him again 15 years later.